Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Leadership Adventure. Today, I'm here with Ben Richards. Ben is a former founder. He built a SaaS platform from the ground up and had an 8-figure exit. And Ben is here to share some of his story, some of his biggest mistakes with us today. Welcome, Ben. How did you get started as a founder?
So I definitely didn't have any aspirations as a kid of being a founder. I saw my friends and other people at school starting businesses, and that definitely wasn't for me. I guess I scraped through school, got the minimum that I needed to get into uni, and then I did a marine biology degree, and I did a master's in event management. So I spent a long time at uni, and then I spent some time in Europe, and during that time I had all sorts of random jobs. I worked in pool shops, I worked in factories, McDonald's, hotels, you name it. And then finally it came to time to get a job. And as you can imagine, my resume was quite confusing. Someone who was a marine biologist and an international event manager was not that appealing to many people. So I was looking for a very long time, and eventually someone did me a favor and offered me a 3-month internship just to get something on my resume. And that was at an advertising / strategy agency, which was something I knew nothing about. But I worked there for a few months, and I actually really loved it. It wasn't your typical advertising agency in like producing banners and things like that. It was very, very strategic and very enterprise focused. So we were working with some of the biggest companies in the world, guiding their marketing strategy, doing vertical marketing. I was working with defense, with Microsoft, Intel, all these big names, and at the very top level. So I was sitting in boardrooms about 30 years younger than everyone else in the boardroom, learning very, very quickly what it was all about. And I really loved that, to be honest. And so I worked there for a few years, and I started to get into software because it was really starting to become a big thing, and a few of our clients were demanding software. So I ended up starting the software side of the agency. Again, something I knew nothing about. But we found a few good developers and ended up growing the software business to being a large portion of the revenue and building some amazing software for some of the biggest companies in the world.
Incredible.
Yeah, so that was really fun, and I really loved that. And then I sort of got this idea that I wanted to build our own software, because building software is fun, but it's not that fun when you've got 200 people sitting over the top of you saying, build this, now change this and do this. And often thinking that they weren't necessarily the right decisions. And I guess this is when my eclectic past came in handy, because all these jobs that I had, I'd been exposed to all different things. And the main thing that I'd been exposed to was the pool industry. I worked as a pool cleaner and a pool technician. I've fixed pumps and worked in a pool shop. So I had about 7 years of exposure in that industry. And it was highly dysfunctional and highly fragmented because, as you can imagine, nobody really builds software for those niche industries. And that industry is so unusual because it's got a retail component, it's got a service component, it's got a whole water chemistry component, which, is a whole bunch of different things. And when I was in that business, we were using, I think, 8 different pieces of software. None of them talked to each other. And I remember myself and the owners sitting up at night, getting all the invoices, typing them all into one piece of software, then getting them and typing them into another piece of software, then adjusting the inventory. And it was another day's work just doing all the manual entry because of this fragmented environment. So I pitched it to that business that I was working at the time, and I got $20,000 worth of funding, which we burnt through very, very quickly. At that point, it was just kind of a fun project, but it ended up taking off, and it was a side project, just purely bootstrapped for the first 6 or so years. And then when it really started to get traction, we ended up splitting it off into its own business. And eventually that led to an exit last year, which was amazing. We sold the business to the market leader in the industry, the global market leader. That was a process in itself, being a startup / scale up, going through an M&A process with, I won't say their names, but one of the biggest law firms in the world, one of the biggest accounting firms in the world, and the biggest pool and spa provider in the world. So it was quite difficult to sit in a room where their team was about 300 people on their M&A team, and there was me and 2 other people helping me. But thankfully, we had some advisors to help us through that process. But yeah, that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, wow. I bet.
Yeah.
That sounds like a painful process, but you don't have regrets, right?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, it was painful, but yeah, really glad we went through it, and very glad we took on advisors, because I don't think we could have done it alone.
Right. And so, early on, you mentioned when we first connected some of these things that you wish that you would have done differently. What were the main things that come to mind for you now that were the biggest hurdles for you, and, lessons, looking back?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one for me, and it pains me to see this, because it wasn't just me. During my time at that business, and since then especially, I've been talking to founders who are at various stages, whether that's just starting out, just realizing they've got a major issue, or they're at the end. They've unfortunately had to wind up the business because they weren't successful. And the common theme that you see every time is that these issues can trace all the way back to the very beginning. It was because they didn't do their due diligence properly, because they didn't look at their product market fit, because they were, and I was very guilty of this one, Shard, this is the best idea in the world. No one can tell me otherwise. This was my experience when I worked in the industry. So this is the right way to go. And I lived that multiple times in our business. I mean, when we started out, I didn't look at anyone else's software. I used my lived experience to design the software, which cost us a year of delays, because I looked at it from the perspective that which I thought my experience was so extensive, it was right. But I was never a business owner in that industry. So I built the software for me as a pool technician, me as a pool and spa manager, and me as a guy working in the workshop. And then we went to do our sales, and obviously we never spoke to any of those people. We spoke to the business owners, and their list of challenges were quite new to me. So I think that one is just so critical, and it's so devastating for me to talk to these people who have literally, it's never that they didn't work hard enough. A lot of these people worked way harder than me. They were way smarter than me, but they missed one tiny thing when they were doing their research phase, and it just cost them everything. So my strong advice on that is to firstly learn about how your brain works, because your brain is your worst enemy in a lot of these cases. It tries to simplify things. It'll try to confirm things for you. It will lead you down the wrong path. And recently, I've seen a lot of startups who this is being compounded with ChatGPT, because they have this idea. They have tunnel vision about the idea, and then they tell it to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT goes, yeah, that's amazing. You're a genius. You should definitely do that. There is no risk. This is the best idea in the world. And so now you've got these two forces just telling you that this thing's amazing. So I think you need to learn critical thinking. Like, you need to firstly understand the tricks that your brain will play on you, but also learn how to do your research, how to do due diligence. And if you do use ChatGPT, use it against you, not with you. Come up with your ideas, and then tell ChatGPT, tear this thing to shreds. Tell me every problem. Like, you have to make ChatGPT really nasty.
Yeah, that's hilarious, because that whole issue of it being so agreeable, right? Really becoming an issue. And It's funny. I was actually talking to a friend. He was the head of AI, and I said, my chat just keeps chatting. And he's like, well, you got to train it better, right? So that whole key thing is training chat to actually behave a certain way is so important.
So after we spoke the first time, actually, I had this idea for a business, which was basically what we just talked about. I want to interrogate everything that people have done before they go live and tear it to shreds, and make sure that they go on the right path forward and increase the odds, however that is, whether it's changing their go-to-market strategy, whatever it might be. So I had this idea. And then I sat down and started building the website. And I was like, why is this so hard? Why am I struggling? And it's like, oh my God, I'm creating a business about doing your due diligence. And I haven't done any due diligence. I've just gone straight to building the website. And it's so hard to stop yourself from jumping on the tools, because research is boring and it's hard and it's tough to get bad feedback. And it's much more exciting to jump on a website or start building an app. But that's where everything starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
And I do think there's so many good resources out there. This is the other thing. Like, there's people like me who send me an email and say, I'm stuck on this. And I'll look at it, and in 5 seconds, I can tell you what's wrong. And there's people who are very willing to do that, like me, for no cost, because they know what happens when you get this stuff wrong. So I think this is another mistake I made, is I didn't talk to people, and there's so many people out there who are very willing to give their time. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of things like that to avoid this mistake that people fall into.
Years ago when I was coaching at the Australian Institute of Marine Science, and one of the things that was on our agenda was to help people find mentors, because that was a big problem for them to, reach out and connect with mentors. And so, do you feel like that is something that people just don't know who to reach out to, or, why didn't these people that you've been talking to reach out sooner?
I mean, when I was starting out, I didn't reach out because I was so sure that this was the best idea. I sat in front of VCs who tore my idea to shreds, and I walked out of that meeting, didn't take on any of their feedback, and just thought those guys are idiots. And I think that is just such a dangerous way to think, but it is true, and that's the way that founders think. And I think the other thing, and I've heard this one a lot from people, is there is a lot of predatory behavior amongst a lot of these mentors or advisors or consultants, who will take on a business and, again, be that ChatGPT voice of, oh, this is the greatest idea in the world, I'm going to help you. That'll be $5,000 a month, and they'll just keep going until the business fails. And I think there is a bit of a fear around that, and that's across the board with startups. I mean, that's not just advisors, that's developers, that's agencies. So I think there is a bit of mistrust there as well.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. And so I know that you mentioned market research. How do you believe that people should go about market research to really get the most accurate data?
I think the first thing is, and it sounds obvious, but again, I've looked at multiple pitches this week that haven't even hit this, is product market fit and competition. Again, you get this blindness. People are a lot less willing to pay for things than you think. But I think the other thing is competition. It sounds so basic, but I've looked at 2 pitches this week who've said they've got no competition at all. And I jumped on Google and found multiple competitors within minutes. It's quite terrifying. So you need to look at your competition. And if there is competition, don't just find their problems and then move on. You need to tear them to shreds. If it's software, you need to download the software. You need to see what decisions they've made and try and work out why they made decisions, because that gets you so far. And that was another huge mistake I made. Like, we were making business management software. fair enough, there was no one in the pool industry, but there's millions of business management softwares out there. And I didn't look at any of them. And we would have saved so much time, because these people have put a lot of thought into making decisions about why this goes here, why this is the process. And I think, just getting a really, really good grip of that competitive landscape is so important. And then the other one that seems so obvious is this product market fit. You really need to interrogate it. And that was my mistake again. I've lived this, therefore there's product market fit. Again, that bias sneaking in of, I'm one person, that just because I would buy it, it doesn't mean everyone else will. So you need to really look at your sources, look at and see if anyone's done it before, look and see at the challenges, download industry reports, although I'm a bit iffy on how reliable those are. Talk to people in the industry. And when you're talking to the people in the industry, don't just talk to your customer. Go up and down the value chain, talk to their customers, talk to their suppliers. You can't do enough market research. And this is the thing. At some point you do have to stop, and it's going to cause you mistakes. But the thing is to do as much as you possibly can so you don't make the big mistakes. You just make the little mistakes.
So how long do you think that a good amount of time is to spend on market research versus how much you did spend for your business?
Yes. So it really depends on the business. I think we spent about 2 months, and we probably should have spent 4. The reality was we thought that spending 2 months meant we could start build. But what actually happened was, because we didn't spend enough time, we spent another 12 months designing the build and reworking the build. We were already suffering because of not spending enough time up front. But what was happening was, instead of going at the beginning stage, let's redo the product market fit. Okay, that took 4 hours. It was, we've designed this whole thing, spent 2 months on it, put it in front of someone, and they go, no, that's not right. And so it sometimes it's not even this mistake here costs you 2 or 3 years down the track. In our case, it cost us immediately. So it really just kills the business. And I think having done a lot of work in enterprise, to me, the biggest differentiator as a startup that you can have is making good decisions. And that's what this is all about. Because I probably need to be careful how I say this, but enterprise make bad decisions. And that's just structural. That's because they have long decision workflows. They've got risk tolerance. They've got huge teams making decisions. They've got siloed teams. They've got sunk costs. They've got all these things that make it hard for them to make good decisions. As a startup, you've got none of that. So you've got no excuse to make bad decisions, because you're killing you're really your only differentiator against someone who you're competing against who's got a team of 1,000. The ability to be quick, to be lean, to be agile is something that you need to harness. Otherwise, you're just an enterprise, but you've only got 2 people. And so, I really think that that's just so critical.
Did you ever feel that at some point you ended up getting decision fatigue?
Absolutely. And again, actually, it ties back to doing your work up front, because before you release your business, you've got all the time in the world. You don't have all these customers yelling at you. You don't have the system going down. You don't have to be hiring staff. And when you're in that environment, it is so hard to make decisions. You just don't have the time to make decisions because you've got a million other things going on. So that is the worst possible time to be making these decisions, and that's unfortunately the byproduct of this. Whereas if you make the smart decisions up front, the rest of the path is kind of obvious.
Right. And so I know that you said that there was a stage where it was really hard to make payroll. When you shared some notes with me. Tell us a little bit about what happened there. What was the reason for that?
Yeah, so this is another thing that I talk to a lot of startups about, because Again, for us and for many, it's about not doing the work up front and forecasting badly or underestimating costs. And then for me, I spent 4 years refreshing the bank feed at the end of the month, hoping that one of our suppliers would pay so that we could make payroll. Like it was just awful. So ideally, you sort that out before, so this doesn't become a problem. But for us, what we ended up doing is we had to pivot, I guess you would call it, and find alternative streams of revenue. And I think that's something that people underestimate. And there are, once you've got a bit of traction, or even before, there's a lot of adjacent things that you can bring in to basically supplement your cash flow while you need to. And for us, actually, these things that I bought in because it was it was a day before payroll was due and I desperately needed cash, ended up becoming part of our business. They actually, a few of them became fundamental parts of our business because they actually were very decent earners. So I can talk about some of those things that we implemented, if you like.
Sure, yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, so I guess in the early days, we were pre-live and we needed cash flow. But the thing about most of these businesses is, if you're a startup, you've generally got a bunch of experts in something. They're either domain experts or they're tech experts or whatever they might be. If you're going to succeed, they're going to be in the top tier of their area. So we ended up just doing work on the side, whether it was consulting, whether it was building websites, all those types of things. That was the real, when things were really bad. But what I realized is that couldn't last forever. And so as we started to build momentum and build cash flow, I started looking a bit further into the future than tomorrow morning when payroll is due, and started to build out some other more reliable sources of cash flow. So for us, the most successful one, to be honest, was software reselling. So what that was for us is we were going into pool shops, pool businesses every single day, and selling them our solution. And often we would recommend an accounting platform or a point of sale system or an FPOS machine or a scanner or whatever it might be, just because it worked really well with our system. And then I ended up speaking to some of these suppliers, and they said, especially with the SaaS suppliers, they'll offer you commission. And it's not just, X% when you sell, it's X% for the lifetime of that customer. So you're basically building your ARR, which goes straight to your valuation by selling something that you're already selling anyway. So that became a huge part of our revenue stream. We were actually one of the biggest Lightspeed providers on the planet. I think we were the 6th biggest in the world, which is very strange for the industry that we were in, and considering they are a point of sale system for every industry. But we leveraged that really hard, and it became a huge part of our revenue. And same for payments, again, because we were selling invoicing software. We started selling payment solutions, and that's an amazing one because that's not even a percent of ARR. That's a percent of every transaction that goes through that business. So wow. You sell a payment solution, and every time they scan something in the business, every time they send an invoice to their customer, you get a clip of that. So there's a lot of free money out there that people often miss when they're doing that. And we were going way down the rabbit hole. We were selling receipt printers. We were selling cash drawers. We were selling water testing hardware. So we really took advantage of the ecosystem that we were operating within. And
how did you do that? Was it the same customers or?
Yeah, because when we went in, so I guess the best way to describe our business would be digital transformation. So we would walk into a business who had multiple disparate bits of technology, and we would transform that business to be more relevant to today. So everything integrated, everything connected, everything talks to each other, everything's automated, all those types of things. And that was really just our software. That was all these other things, which, the customer was much happier because they got a fully integrated business. They didn't just get our system. And we were obviously much happier because we were getting revenue. And for the businesses that we sold the integrated package versus just our solution, the retention was miles apart. If we just sold our solution in its isolation, the retention was pretty good, but not amazing. Whereas when we sold the integrated package, it was flawless, basically.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how your pivot ended up being a good thing for the business, right? And
exactly, yeah.
How long did that take?
It was 4 years of agony, and then another 2 of being very close. It was a long time.
Wow.
So yeah.
And how did you handle the stress or anxiety, or did you walk through that pretty calmly? How did you handle that personally?
I definitely didn't walk through it calmly. I definitely didn't walk through it calmly. It was really tough, and I think people underestimate the impact of that, and especially, I guess, the thing that you don't think about when you start a business is that this is going to go through multiple parts of my life. Like when I started this business, I was partying every weekend. I didn't have a care in the world, and I was just like, I've got all this time. And then by the time we went live, I had my first kid. And then during that process, I had another child. I got married, and you never really think about your life changing during the course of the business. And so when I needed more and more and more time to work on the business, my time was being taken away by other things. So it definitely took its toll, and I think it still takes its toll to this day. I actually went to a psychologist recently who thinks I have PTSD from starting the business. So yeah.
Wow. And what are you experiencing now that that you feel that it's still affecting you?
So yeah, this is something. So over the last few months, so first of all, I'll say when I sold the business, and then when I left the business shortly after, that was like, in my opinion, that was my ride off into the sunset, relax on the beach, just like, this is what I've been focusing on for the last 10 years. I've done this thing which it's a 1 in a million thing that happens, and it's just like, I'm the luckiest person in the world, and I'm just going to laze around all day and enjoy my life. And everyone said to me that I'm going to be horribly surprised by what actually pans out, and that in 2 or 3 months' time, I'm going to be going crazy, which I thought was just insane. But yeah, I think you get used to the pace, the control, the excitement, again, the things that does to your brain, and going from that, especially coming out of an M&A process, to just nothing. It actually took its toll on me quite a lot. And I felt really bad about it, because I thought, there's all these people struggling, and I've basically hit the jackpot. But then I actually did a post in a startup group and said, what's wrong with me? Am I normal? Like, I'm really worried about this. And then all these people messaged me and called me who'd all exited. And, some of them went down a very dark path, alcoholism, drugs, you name it. I think that sort of abrupt transition it does take its toll on people. So I did struggle for a bit there, and I realize now I definitely can't retire, which is what I thought I was going to do. So yeah, it's fascinating, and it's not something that people talk about, and I didn't hear anything about this until all these people started contacting me who were in a very similar situation, and told me these horror stories, I actually got off quite lightly compared to what a lot of these people told me. So yeah, it was
Wow.
fascinating.
And so during this time, did you have any supports, like as you were going through, the very stressful times or the extremely hectic times? Did you have anything that you felt like really helped you through that time?
No, and I think this was a huge mistake that I made. I think it's very easy um, to get used to this environment and not realize how much of a toll it's taking on you. Like sometimes my wife would say to me, you need to have a break. Your personality is changing. You look like really frantic, and I was completely taken aback most of the time, and I would say to her, no, I'm fine, I'm there's nothing wrong, I'm just cracking on. It's a bit stressful, but I'm fine. And towards the end, actually, and this is when I realized how scary it is when you get in that head mindset, you don't even realize you're in. Towards the end, she actually sent me away and said, you need to have a break now. And she sent me off to this Airbnb. And I got there and I sat outside and I was looking at the ocean, and I've never felt anything like this. I just felt this like wave of
Yeah, so
relaxation
much
come over me. Yeah, and I just felt like a new person, but I didn't realize that I was here and I could go down here. I honestly thought that I was down here. It's quite scary that you can get yourself into quite a stressed out state without realizing you're there.
Yeah, it is really interesting because, yeah, it sounds like it's like the tension that accumulates, right? You're just holding this tension for a really long period of time, and there's no release, right?
No,
So that
and it
accumulates.
becomes normal for you. You just think
Mhm.
that's your normal state of mind. So yeah, my strong advice to anyone is to take time to reset, to talk to people. Like I think everyone who's going through this process needs a therapist or a psychologist or something like that, just to give them that reality check. Because it's very
Yeah,
easy to keep going and keep going and keep going. And then 10 years have passed, and you don't really realize that you were in that state. And yeah, it's horrible for you. I mean, I'm sure I did
well,
huge amounts of damage to my brain and my body, keeping it in that state.
right. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that, like, as executive coaches, we actually work with clients on all levels. So it's that self-care aspect is a really important foundation of leadership, and having that continuity and sustainability of leadership. And when I was coaching at Stanford University in their executive program, the first thing they do is actually start to build in some routine for activities that are not only, brain activities. So they have people going and playing badminton and tennis and doing yoga, and that's how they start their days, to help them get into the habit of doing something else to release the tension, because otherwise it's really easy to implode.
Exactly, and I think what you're saying about coaching is another one that I wish I did, because it is a very lonely place. Like I was the only one in my business who really understood what I was doing, what was going on. And now that I'm doing this, I realize how beneficial it is to talk to someone who actually understands what you're going through, who understands the problems. Like, even if they're not helping, just to get on a call and go, oh my God, I've had the worst week and this and this and this. And they actually know what you're talking about. Because most people, you try and explain what you're going through, and it's just incomprehensible to them.
We all have blind spots, and we all need somebody else to help shine a light sometimes and say, hey, have you looked at this? Or even, as you're saying, your wife noticed that you had a different personality. We don't notice these things ourselves, right?
Yeah,
So those are all
exactly.
really important, like, personal awareness and growth areas that founders really need to pay attention to that I think nobody thinks about at the beginning when they're first
No.
starting.
And I think what you said
That's
about someone who can lift you out of the depths and is so important, because I know there was a few years there where I was just build. And if someone like a business coach had grabbed me and said, stop, let's come back to the high level, let's have a look, let's look at what's going on. Is this so important? Shouldn't you refocus on this? You know, it's so easy to just get in that, you know, one day ahead thinking and forget why you started the business or what you're trying to achieve. And yeah, that was one of my big mistakes, I think, is not having someone to keep dragging me back to reality.
Yeah. And do you know why you didn't have someone in that capacity? Was it just an oversight, or was it, you know, that you just didn't think there was a need?
I think I needed somebody to lift me out of the day-to-day and tell me you need some help. Like I was just so consumed with, you know, the latest issue, the latest problem, the latest, you know, complaint, whatever it might be, or the changes in the industry. I was so reactive to things that we stopped being strategic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, because when I've worked with a couple of female founders as well who had a male co-founder. And with those two situations, what happened was that the female founders sought out help, right, to get that perspective, and they saw that need. Whereas the male founders that they were working with, they didn't do that until investors told them to do that at some stage, right?
Yeah.
So it was initiated externally. And I wondered about that and why that was, whether it was just, you know, that perhaps men didn't feel as comfortable asking for help, right? Or if there were other things around that. And those are just a couple of situations, but it made me really curious why that was the case, and how those kinds of, you know, like when someone can only see their own perspective, or they have a co-founder where they have very different roles, right? They can offer some perspective for each other. You had a partner as well in your scenario, right?
Yes, as a technical founder, but we were, you know, obviously very going down our own paths, very different parts of the business. And also, you know, he was doing the same thing. He was pulling 24-hour days and things like that. Like we would get together and complain, but with those relationships, they're always very tricky because you're both under a world of stress and yeah, it's I think you need someone outside who's not under the pump and not, or maybe not has been through that, but is not going through that at the moment, who can kind of give a bit of thought to it and give you a bit more grounded advice. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the reflection, I think, is so important, to have that regular space for just checking in. Well, what am I actually experiencing here right now? And being able to make those conscious choices in those moments, right? It's a little bit of slowing down to go faster and better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, are there any other mistakes or any other things that you think are important for people to be aware of, to consider along this journey?
I mean, I think one thing that came from tight cash flow was we were struggling to make sales, and we couldn't afford a salesperson. We couldn't afford to do marketing. So we had to find creative ways to do that. And what we ended up doing was, again, you know, you talk about this eclectic past, and I just think it's so important for people to just do a bunch of random stuff, because all of this stuff paid dividends for me later. But yeah, my experience in enterprise really paid off. So I instead of trying to find a way to do sales and try to raise cash or whatever it might be to pay salespeople, I ended up going to all the suppliers in the industry. And I get the pitch was really quite simple, because at that point we had a nice little pitch, was that these businesses, when they use our software, their efficiency increases, their sales increases, and therefore they buy more stuff. And particularly for chemical suppliers, what we built was a water testing solution for pools that recommended based on science rather than guesswork. And I was a pool technician, and I actually had a science degree, but I had no idea how to dose a pool. It's really, really complicated. So what you end up doing is you add a couple of things and you kind of hope for the best. But we built a calculator that actually told them prescriptively, these are all the things that you need to add. And the result of that is not only that the pool is better managed, but you sell more chemicals. So for the suppliers, that meant if someone is using our software, you're selling them more chemicals. So we took that to a few of the suppliers in the industry and said, you've got salespeople, I think there was over 150 active salespeople across all of the different suppliers. You've got salespeople. Would you just take our little flyer, pop it on the desk when you walk into a pool shop, and just show it to them? And that was as far as we thought it would go. And that's how it started. But how it transformed was that rather than doing that, the benefits were so good for them, for people using our software, that what they ended up doing is they'd walk into a pool shop and say, we'll give this to you for free. So our biggest barrier to adoption, the price, was gone. So they'd walk into a pool shop and say, here's this thing, it's going to transform your business, you're going to make more sales, you're going to operate better, you're going to have more time at night, and you don't have to pay for it. And that was amazing. And we never had to pay those salespeople, obviously, because the cost of the salespeople was zero for them. They were already going into these pool shops. There was huge ROI for them to sell our software. So we had a team of 150 salespeople going around Australia and New Zealand selling our software for free. And that was that moment in our business. Again, complete fluke because of something I did a long time ago. That really, really changed completely the landscape. And I think we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if that didn't happen, because I don't know how we would have made those sales. So channel is a really, really good thing to look at. And again, if we'd done our due diligence up front and we'd done our research, we would have worked this out and we would have gone to market very differently with an enterprise solution that was basically targeting those enterprises, feeding down to the businesses.
That's so interesting. And so if someone is trying to think of those channels, what's the starting point to educate themselves on how they could approach that strategy?
I think you have to start by looking at the value chain and looking at all of the different players that connect with your business. And it might be the consumers that are buying from them. If it's B2B, it might be the consumers, it might be the suppliers, whoever it might be. There's a bunch of different people within that industry who interact with your business. And then you have to try and think about whether there's a benefit for them. And with SaaS, there often is, because if you're a supplier to a business, you want that business to operate well. You just need to go through and look at, and we spoke to all of the suppliers in the industry, and we got our heads around what they were looking for and what their challenges were, and trying to understand what they needed. And they needed some sort of differentiator to say that you should buy from me rather than the other 15 suppliers in the industry. And this ended up being a differentiator. Initially, it was where they would offer it for free until everyone started offering it for free, and then it was just sort of matching everyone else. But yeah, the most important thing is, and this is what should be done on day one, is looking at that value chain. It is so important to understand not just your target customer, but everybody that they interact with in their ecosystem.
Yeah, that's such a great lesson, and to, I think, understand like how this exit came about. What was it that happened? What sparked that?
Yeah, so we went through a full process with an advisor, and we were going after two main targets. One was typical VCs, investors, those types of people, and then the other was strategic, which was people in the industry, and we we dropped all of our non-strategics within the first few months because the valuation mechanism just isn't there. For them, it's a straight, ROI, and I'm talking financial ROI, obviously. So how much can I make from this in X amount of time? So they offered standard multiples, but when we looked at the strategics, they were all going for the same thing, which is they wanted vertical integration in the industry, which is what every industry is looking for at the moment. It's top to bottom, supply to consumer integration, and so all of them were looking at the same thing, which was build versus buy, and also not just build versus buy, but existing market share. And so for us, we had a very, very dominant market position in ANZ, unparalleled in other industries. I don't think you could achieve the market share that we did. So it wasn't just about buying something that gave them financial return. In fact, none of them cared about financial return. None of them really cared about charging for this thing, whatever it was. For them, it was about accelerating their vertical integration, but also finding a new way to access customers. And so then the multiple doesn't really become about finance. It becomes about how much does this business purchase? How much revenue do they make? How many customers do they have? How many pools do they manage? How much equipment is in each of those pools? And then the value becomes huge because you're not talking about $100 a month in software subscription. You're talking about one pool with $10,000 worth of equipment, and it becomes huge. And we interacted with 500,000 pools every year. So when you do those numbers, it becomes a very, very different conversation. So I think people neglect the strategic angle a lot, and I'm very surprised. Even at the stage of raising, I've spoken to a lot of people who are looking to raise capital from VCs when there's a very, very clear strategic angle with people in the industry who would benefit from this software.
Yeah. And so do you feel that now you just see so much more in terms of strategy and opportunity as a former founder than you did before while you were in the thick of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad I've had time to reflect and look back on all of that, and also to work with so many startups, because I see all the stuff that I did. I remember creating a forecast that we were going to make, I think it was $15 million in the first year at 90% margin or something like that. And I see those every day of the week. And that's the most obvious example. But having gone through it all and made all the mistakes and done all this stuff, you can look at a pitch deck, you can look at a forecast, you can look at a go-to-market strategy and just go, bang, that's not going to work, or you need to change this, or have you thought about this? And this is why, my biggest regret and my biggest recommendation is to just utilize the community, because there are so many people in this community who can just look at these things and just tell you in seconds you've gone the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being willing to share your story and your hard, lessons learned in that 10 years. It's a lot, right? It's a lot to go through. And do you feel that only entrepreneurs can understand, like, to really get it, to understand that journey?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's just, there's so many things. Like, people talk about, it's just like, I've got a really stressful job too. And it's like, yeah, you've got a stressful job, but you don't have to worry about payroll. You don't have to worry about, like, it's not just a stressful day job. You're wearing 15 different hats. You're worrying about so many different things, and it's a lot. It's definitely rewarding, and I'm super passionate about it, but it definitely takes a certain type of person to go through this.
Yeah, and I know that you mentioned, some potential founders you were talking to who had created products, and that, they were at the brink of having to remortgage their house, right? Because they weren't getting traction, and you could see that this just wasn't going to work. What, like, if somebody is at that stage, right, and they've invested all this time and energy, what do you think that they need to be doing at that point?
I think, you talk about the sunk cost fallacy, and that's something that big enterprises and big businesses can do. They can kind of think of from that lens because they've got more money to throw at it. But if you are in that position, you need to stop. Again, you need to talk to somebody, because you don't do this alone. And I did it alone, and all these people did it alone. And when you get to that point, you're not thinking clearly, and at that point it's gambling. Like, you're much better off just going to the casino and putting whatever you've got left on black. Sorry, I'm not encouraging gambling, by the way. But the odds are a lot higher. But again, you're not thinking clearly at that point. You need to take a real pause and just reevaluate, because it's dangerous and it's scary. And it's sorry, it's really upsetting for me, because I have had some really hard conversations with some people at that stage, and you need to see those things coming, because it's tough, especially these people have worked their guts out for 5 or 10 years, and it's come to nothing. But you just need to be ready to walk away. Again, this is why that pre-validation is so important, because it always stems back to that.
Sometimes, I think it's not recognized until it is too late how important it is to have that perspective, and just having other people around that can reflect, right, and help us look in these corners that we don't look at because we don't have eyes in every direction, right?
Exactly.
And as you said, you found it upsetting to see this happening, right? And it is really hard to see people in such a bad place when some of those things could have been prevented. So I really appreciate your time to share this with us today.